You may hear some strange sound effects from upstairs because my son and my wife are watching a movie that's got shooting, explosions, and a science fiction thing, and so uh, that's all right. I'm going to see if it's not too distracting. They've got they've got the sound turned way down. All right, Lance. So what did he do that he shouldn't have done? It was a simple matter. He climbed a tree. That's all he did. He climbed a tree, uh, and he, he had his lunch, and he'd ridden his bike far enough that since I think I told you this, since the road was straight to the west, he could see down it, and also it sloped down. He could see down it way in the distance. He could see the line of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Uh, and to see mountains, it just swelled his heart. And he thought, oh, maybe I could see him better if I climbed a tree. And there were two options. Looking to the west, on his left, on the southeast corner of this crossroads where Shakespeare Road met the border road, right about there, there was a huge white pine, and that would have been pretty easy to climb. But his view was gonna be blocked by a big oak that was on the southwest corner of that intersection. So which was a little further back in the woods, but not much. And so he decided for that one, and he went over. And in order to get to that first branch, it looked like he wasn't going to be able to do it. He didn't have a rope or anything. But he found that if he leaned a part of a fallen branch up against the oak, he could just get enough of a footing that he got a hold of the first big limb and then scrambled up on there. And then from then it was pretty easy climbing from big limb to big limb. He went up a couple more, being careful. Matter of fact, he crossed himself before. I'm always afraid to do that because I'm left-handed and I'm afraid I'm going to do it wrong. But him being a good Catholic, he crossed himself before he went up any further, and he waited until he got up there, and then he turned around because when he knew he had a good perch, and sure enough, he had a better view of the mountains. By now there was a little bit of a wind picking up, not much. It was just beautiful, and he sat there, and I don't know if you've ever had a moment like that where it was so otherworldly in a way, and his recent past had been that way. He kind of thought about where he was at this point in his life. He graduated college. He was 22 years old. Didn't have a job yet, and he was about to fulfill his quest, his bicycle quest, and he'd had this unbelievable experience in the city of Richland, and so he was pensive about it. He even got thinking about a poem as he was looking at that mountain. It wasn't. I guess it was a poem, but it was a story that an English teacher that he'd had a very special English teacher too, Mr. Holmes, and he remembered the story about it. He wasn't a very good student in literature, but he could remember stories, and Mr. Holmes had told how Wordsworth, when he was a boy, he had borrowed a boat at night in a lake and rowed out in the lake a while. Wordsworth then wrote this in some poem called the Preface or the Prelude or something like that. Lance couldn't remember. It didn't matter. It was a story, not the words in this case. He rowed the boat out that he'd quote unquote borrowed. He'd found it wasn't his, and he rowed it out into the lake in order to see this big mountain that was there behind him on the shore, and it was at night and all. It was awe-inspiring. But then he rode out a little bit further, and here behind that mountain there was a much bigger mountain that as he rode out, it sort of rose up to view behind, and it was so awesome that it scared him actually. And he turned the boat around, rowed back to shore, put the boat back where it was. He had been awestruck by the majesty, I guess, of that mountain. Well, anyway, he remembered that story because Mr. Holmes was such a good, passionate storyteller and English teacher. So anyway, Lance thought maybe if he went a little higher in the tree, he might be able to see his mountains behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Alleghenies. And there was a branch that he could get to pretty easy. So he crossed himself and went on up higher and didn't look back until he got up there and got secure. And then he turned around and looked, and sure enough, there were his mountains. He knew that range of mountains would take him home to Dutch Corner. And he looked, and there was still another limb even higher. Should he go higher? No, he did not. And that may be the point in his life where he went from being a boy to being a man, because he realized he'd already taken risks that he shouldn't have done. So he enjoyed the view a little bit longer and then started down and found out, as many a cat has found out, and he really knew. He was a good tree climber. He'd loved to climb trees ever since he was a boy. It's harder to come down than it is to go up. And so he was being real careful going down that tree. He made it down to his first perch that he had. And then he had to lower himself onto that branch that he'd leaned up, and he was doing fine, but then his foot slipped on the branch. He didn't hurt himself very bad, but he went sliding down the limb and skinned his arm, tore his sleeve, and then landed on the ground, and he was real happy to be back on the ground. And so there was really no damage done, just a torn sleeve and a skinned up spot in his arm. So, considering himself very lucky, he went back to his bicycle, headed back toward Richland. He now had the wind at his back, and it was slightly downhill, and he had joy in his heart because he'd seen his mountains.